morning, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. And thanks for taking the time to join. And the webinar is just to share some information about doing business in Australia. We'll run about an hour and will be run by two speakers, one of them being myself and one of them is my colleagues there, Varun Kumar. So a bit of myself, I guess. My name is Wenshen Chai. I go by my surname Chai. For those who know me, obviously they will know, they're fond of me telling them this anyway. Chai, chai latte if you struggle to remember my name, but if you address me as Mr. Latte, I probably will respond still. That's no problem from my side. I'm obviously have involved in public practice for more than 20 years. That's probably most part of my career. I do have some exposure in commercial sectors, and my core expertise is audit. Other than that, obviously do know a bit of tips for doing business in Australia and Asia as well, and for doing business in Australia, most importantly from an Asian perspective. Originally from Malaysia, do speak a few languages and dialects. Hence, obviously, also chairing the Nationals Asia Desk Committee of Australia. Now, okay, don't want to steal too much of a thunder from my other colleagues anyway, so I would, get him to sort of give you all a bit of a rundown of himself as well. Varun.
So, hi everyone, good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are. So my name's Varun Kumar. Unfortunately, I'm not named after a T, so you'd have to call me Varun. I'm the National Head of Tax and Business Advisory at More Australia. So previously I've worked with the Perth office, but now I've moved on to a national role. I primarily work within tax and business advisory, and I have helped heaps of clients coming into Australia from overseas, setting up businesses or property investments, and I've dealt with a lot of cross-border tax issues. And within the More Australia network, I assist all firms staying up to date with any taxation and regulatory changes. I also present on various training and also provide technical support within the network in relation to any tax queries that pop up. So as you can probably make out by my accent, I'm not originally from Australia. I'm a migrant from India. I grew up in Bombay and now Mumbai, and now I've been in Australia for the last 15 or 16 years. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Thanks. Thanks, Varun. I suppose both of us, you can see that is Asian. I think that is a good reason why we are telling you all that based in Asia Pacific how to do business in Australia, because hearing from both two Asian speakers probably give you a bit of a better insight than our counterpart anyway. Means no offense there. Now, just a bit of an overview about about this, the construct of this webinar. So obviously we'll start off with talking about Australia in general, and some of you would have already known, I guess, not to state some of the obvious, but we'll kind of go through that for the benefit of others. And obviously looking at the ties with APAC. We'll then talk about regulatory environment. We'll spend a bit of time to talk about the growth opportunities. Then I'll hand it over to Varun to talk about taxation and structures. Come back to me. I'll close off with More Australia. And then obviously the last bit will be question sessions where everybody will encouraged to sort of put their question into the chat box, and then hopefully that we can sort of answer a few of them. If not, we'll obviously definitely come back with you with one. Now, without further ado, I guess we should go into knowing about a bit about Australia. So Australia, at a glance, most of you probably would have known that already known that Canberra is the capital of Australia. We are the 6th largest nations in the world, if you like. We have here this state that we have a coastline of 59,000 kilometers. Now, in terms of land size, I would say land area, there is a 7.7 million square kilometers. It's quite a huge country, but with very, comparatively, very little small populations, only 25.7 million. Nearly half of them actually either have been born overseas or one or both parents have been born overseas. So we are pretty multicultural in a way. So one of the most multicultural countries in the world. That say, so we obviously, Asians can't be the first peoples anyway. The indigenous peoples call themselves the First Nation peoples. They do have, but they only command around 3% of the populations. English is the official spoken and written language. Sydney being the largest capital by populations. In fact, 1/3, I would say 1/3 of the population actually residing in Sydney or Melbourne. And so I'm based in Western Australia, so doesn't have the luxuries of having all that bustings in the west and in the east coast. But anyway, so we do have a fair share. Australian, obviously, we our currency, official currency, Australian dollar. The populations, I would say that we have pretty much a highly educated bunch. We have 99% literacy rate. 53% of the working age populations has either completed tertiary or vocational education. So we're pretty proud of ourselves that we are of the smart bunch, if you like. So Australia run off the federated democracy systems. What you mean is that is based on the constitutional monarchy with separations of powers at the federal level between the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. We do have a figure. The head of state is Queen Elizabeth II, but obviously we all know how that came about. There are 3 levels of governments, being federal, and then the next tier down will be the state and territory. There are 6 states, although it seems to be we have 7 states there, but the blue bit that you see, the light blue bit is actually the biggest territory that we have, called Northern Territory. So some of you may not know, we have 3 internal territory, one of them being the Northern Territory. Obviously, we have an Australian Capital Territory, and there's one little bit there next to the Tasmanian. And there we also have 6 external territory, which, I only know that that's the number anyway, so can't really run through all of the whole things as to what it is. But it's fair to say that it's big in a sense. So we at the lowest local governments, we either call them shire or town or city, depends on the status of the populations. And so we are definitely one of the highly developed and largest economy in the world. So as you can see, the GDP, obviously this is for 2020, the year 2020, the GDP is about USD 1.33 trillion. I think that's come about 1.98 trillion Aussie dollars. So we ranked the 15th in global by GDP, 5th in Asia. The gross national income per capita is USD 52K. So we by that number, we rank 10th in the world. So in terms of industries, well, pretty much the main contributors, the number one contributor will be the mining. 11% of the Australian GDP. Now, I did highlight here the health and education. The reason why is that actually, other than the mining, there's a big portion of it as per Australian, Austrate, if you like, the promotional agencies for international trade. A huge part of it is actually of the GDPs is attributing to services. Now it says 71.9% is lumped in a lot of things, and health and education being one of them. Education and training, in fact, is 5.1% of the GDP for 2020. Healthcare and social assistance is 7.7%. So together is about 12.8%. So health and education command another big portion of the GDP. Now, other than that, we do have, well, off this slide there, obviously, we do have manufacturing, which is 6.1%. And then we do have agriculturals. If anybody start thinking that, how come Chai didn't mention any agricultural for Australia? We have agricultural, forestry and fishing, which is identified as one of the key area of industry, one of the key industries. So it does have contributed 2% to the 2020 GDP. As of December 2020, I think it's good to know that Australia had a positive trade balance of 6,785 million. So that sort of tell us that we definitely have it is the one of the most developed economy, and we have a lot more to offer to the APAC in terms of doing business. So it's no surprise that we are one of the world's most business friendly, if I may say that, one of the world's most business friendly countries, one of the easiest places in the world to do business. And we are according to the ranking published by the World Bank, as you can see in the numbers, we are ranked 14 overall. If we're comparing with the, among those countries with or economy with the population of more than 20 million, Australia is now ranked 5th in the world behind Korea being first, US and second, and UK is 3rd, Malaysia is 4th. But anyway, so out of the 5th, anyway, there you can see that we are, in part with the two others, APEC counterpart, which is Korea and Malaysia. So in terms of getting credit, we are the 4th in getting credit. We obviously a lot of we have a sound and established financial systems. Getting credit is no problems. We in fact in terms of superannuation systems. If you recall from the previous slide, we probably ranked globally the 5th in terms of that. And that 11th on in terms of construction permits means that we actually get things done as soon as we can. We are ranking 6th in enforcing contract as well. So I think that's become no surprise. Sort of positions Australia as very friendly in a way, laid back, and we want to sort of be part of APAC, if you like, or APAC regions. And into that, you can see that in this slide here, we do have a deep and very close ties with APEC. Now, this is one of the things to caution here. This is not the all the full list of free trade agreement that we have with the world. Obviously, here is concentrating with on APAC. So we kind of included New Zealand as part of the APAC regions, although, you know, anyway, that yes, and we obviously started the first free trade agreement with the close counterpart, which is New Zealand, and all the way through to now. A few things that I would like to highlight in this slide is that for, you know, there may be some countries in the APAC regions that are not kind of distinctively mentioned here, included here, but if you pay attention to ASEAN, there is on 2010 there is an ASEAN free trade agreement. ASEAN, the full name is Australia ASEAN's New Zealand free trade agreement, and that's including a couple of countries in a way, and I suppose specifically the ASEAN's countries, including Brunei, Cambodia, Indonesia, Malaysia, Myanmar, and Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, Vietnam as well. So the other one is the other one in the slides that sort of want to bring to your attention is the Trans-Pacific partnerships. That's obviously not only Asian. Some of you would have known that is including 4 non-Asian countries as well, but there Brunei, Malaysia, Japan, Singapore, Vietnam, New Zealand are there as well. The other one that I would like to sort of highlight to all of you is the 2020 PACER Plus, and now that's including to sort of demonstrate that how far-fetched the Australian government will go to do international trade with the world, because that is including the Pacific island as well. So we do have some that is not yet enforced, particularly the one that RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. Now that while it's not yet enforced, I think it's going through, as we speak, is going through the ratification process. Soon will be enforced, and that's probably will be the biggest one so far in terms of you know, partnerships. There's a lot of countries there. So Brunei, Cambodia, China, Indonesia, Japan, Korea, Laos, Malaysia, Myanmar, Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, Vietnam, and New Zealand. Now, India was once in that piece. Apologies to my other colleague there. Anyway, India was, but you know, for some reason they are not allowed to, which we have and already officially endorsed that. But we do have, and in India, free trade agreements still under negotiations. So it's all good from there. So that go to say that, so we have that deep ties, and this sort of just want to quickly bring to your attention the you know, the depth of how, you know, the ties with APEC. As you can see on the very top left-hand corner, you can see that there's Asia. We actually have the two-way trade by regions. Asia alone itself commands 65.2%. So that's how close we are with APEC. And if you move down to the right bottom corners, where you can see the APEC and the Asians, they sort of give you a bit of ideas that with the APEC, there's 73.9%. ASEAN itself is a 30% share there. And no surprise that the Australian top 10 export markets, you can see that you know, China is in the top, and you can see that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 out of the 10 is actually from Asia, and then the Australia top 10 import sources. Again, you can see that our Asian counterparts command a fair few of the places there. Again, this is sort of give a bit of an idea to the audience as to what sort of exports that we major in and import. That's no surprise. It's a lot of it is tied with the mining or resource, if you like, resource and energy sectors. They do have, like you can see, as I say, although I didn't mention that the agriculture is the main contributors, you know, but the beef and wheat, the number 16 at wheat, they are part of the major export or highlights of Australian export. The top 20 imports, that personal travel definitely is, and the other thing is refined petroleums and passengers motor vehicles. So I'll give the audience a bit of ideas as to where we sit in terms of, you know, our relationship and our ties with the world. Obviously, this is the world anyway, so can't find a slide that actually show the exact magnitude with APAC. The next, I will quickly talk about the regulatory environment. That's being who you're gonna expect to deal with in terms of doing business in Australia. First off is ASIC. In terms of doing business, that's no surprise. Most of you probably would already know. It's administered the Corporate Act 2001. So it's responsible for enforcing company and financial law to ensure market integrity and consumer protections. The other, prime regulatory body that you will be dealing with is, I suppose, is no surprise, it's ATO anyway, we call it, the Australian Taxation Office. Varun will obviously touch on that a little bit, as although all of us will regard that office as being the nasty office, the nastiest office, if you like. But yeah, they do have responsibility for administrating Australia federal taxation systems. Mostly part of you would have known that, you know, we have a process of annual assessment, so they will administrating that process of annual self-assessment, and they do conduct random audits. If you are thinking of, oh, hey, what do they do with the rest of the time? They do random audit, and just to verify, assessment, keep your feet on, keep you on the right track. They obviously still do collect taxes and also excises, administer the higher education contribution schemes, more like like a support scheme for getting universities and having higher educations. Well, they do handle the private health insurance rebate as well. And one of the last responsibilities they kind of share the responsibilities of administrating the Australian super fund, superannuation systems, the physical regulations, in fact. Now, obviously, Australian Stock Exchange, which will be well known, I guess, is one of the world's leading exchange in the world, and that will be the prime stock exchange in Australia. We call it ASX. So formed back in 1987, but yeah, it's kind of, we all know what's the functions of ASX in a way. Now, just want to quickly talk about APRA. APRA sort of, sit in between a few places. Mainly, they kind of oversees the banking regulations. All financial institutions are regulated by this body. Financial intermediaries, though, on the other hand, have to obtain licenses under Corporation Act 2001. So somehow ASIC have a bit of share there, share of load there. But in essence, APRA supervises the functions of the central bank, the Reserve Bank of Australia, responsible for prudential supervisions of the other deposit-taking institutions. Just to reiterate, yeah, they also got a lot of to do with super funds and life and general insurance. The other one, the next one on the slide is Australian Competitions and Consumer Commissions, the ACCC. That is, they deal with the competitions matters responsible for enforcing the Trade Practice Act 1974 and the Price Surveillance Act 1983. Basically, is to prohibiting, provide or prevent unfair trade practices, misleading and deceptive conduct, false representations, and advertisement. So they also involve in warranties, product safety standards, and informations. Now, and the next one, which is probably very, very important to any foreigners coming into invest and doing business in Australia, that is being the FIRB, what we call a Foreign Investment Review Board. Any major, I say major, obviously there is a threshold to follow. That any major foreign investment proposal will be, or application we call it, will be, will go through FIRB case by case basis, just to make sure that those proposal or applications are consistent with the Australian nationals' interest. So they will follow the scopes of Australian foreign investment policies, which is the guiding document. And the other thing is another sort of act that they follow is the Foreign Acquisitions and Takeover Act 1975. They only make recommendations. So one of the other key features here as well. They will only make recommendations and to the treasurers on behalf of the government. Okay, so I'll probably quickly go into talk about the industry opportunities before I hand it over to Varun and talk about taxations. This is the key industry area, or may I say the growth opportunities. It's not okay, right? Sorry about the delay, if you like, on that side. So as you can see, there's agribusiness and food. So I guess it's come no surprise as with the global food demand booming, and Australia has always been seen as the premium food suppliers. So that are huge opportunities where the sectors can actually scale up, particularly in terms of innovations, the production sites, incorporating food fiber products and advanced food processing. The other area is digital economy and ICT. Probably we all know what ICT is, information communication technologies. So Australia do have a e-ready government, industry and consumer. We're pretty on digitals, if you like. Although a lot of people complain about the broadband network here, but that's for us to sort of chat other day. So there are opportunities in terms of collaborative R&D, digital infrastructures and data centers, and cyber securities, fintech and agri-tech. Major infrastructures, and I guess that's being the prime economic movers, that there's always a key focus there. So at one stage I heard that Australia's infrastructures are actually quite aging. So there's a heaps of opportunities where we actually can, both I'm saying that not only obviously the Australian, but the foreign investors can involve in those major project here, in terms of in all areas, in terms of I suppose infrastructure development, material science and technologies. Well, if everybody thinking that there's not much of a manufacturing activities in Australia, that probably wrong. And actually, manufacturing is command at 2%, as 5.1%, as I earlier touched on, to the contribute 5.1% to the Australia gross domestic product. So we do have a niche area in advanced manufacturing, which some of the areas are composite research, including carbon fibers or for aerospace, automotive, industrial, light metals as titanium, processings, including additive manufacturing, bioproducts. That's one of the area as well for medical and industry use, including nanotechnologies, electronic and photonic materials such as batteries and energy storage. Australia do have a world-class research infrastructures, strong but flexible regulatory regimes, including IP protections. We do have tax incentives as well for any research and development. So the other thing, so another area is medical science and technologies. No surprise, I guess. There's we are one of the global leaders in medical technologies. There's a heap of opportunities ranging from discovery, research through to product development. So we in terms of biotechnic, pharmaceuticals, medical device, tropical medicines and digital health areas, and that's probably the growing area as well. So, and there's a lot of case studies in terms of apps developed in relation to digital space. Some of you may be aware that we are actually one of the popular destinations for clinical trials. So we do have established a mature process in fast tracking clinical trials. Resource and energies, that's being the main contributors. There's always being heaps of opportunities there with abundant and diverse minerals and energy resources. So obviously the areas we're talking about is probably more sophisticated in equipment or automation in mining and technologies. And a huge part of it is actually in service industry. We have a lot of consulting firms coming up, providing services as ancillary of services to the resources and energy sector. Tourism infrastructures will be one of the key focus area for the government. We all know that that part of that industry sector seems to be in a bit of a troubles, and so we have the Australian governments have provided over 1 billion in recovery and stimulus assistance to business to make sure that these sectors come out from the negative impact of COVID-19 pandemic. Northern Australia is, we kind of one of the big focus geographically is one of the big focus areas. So that including WA and Northern Territories and Queensland. So I guess that's no surprise because it's close proximity to Asia. Weather-wise, is tropicals and it's very conducive and very customary to especially our APAC counterparts. Now, I think that's pretty much from my side at this stage. I'll hand it over to Varun for the taxations and structures.
Thanks, Chai. So as Chai said it so nicely, the Australian office is the one responsible for maintaining the integrity of our tax system. They are not as nasty as Chai suggested. They're okay. The main thing to bear in mind is the ATO has wide capabilities when it comes to data matching. They collect information from various overseas sources. They have exchange of information agreements with numerous countries. So they do track a lot of foreign activity going on with all their residents in Australia. So for instance, we have something called AUSTRAC. AUSTRAC is basically any transactions of over $5,000 get reported to AUSTRAC, and then the ATO will come to you and ask you where the money is coming from, what is it? Is it income? So that just gives you an overview of like, yep, the ATO does have a lot of audit activity when it comes to foreign investments in particular. So I thought it'd be good to just give you guys a brief understanding of how our tax system works and what gets caught within Australia. So as a starting point, generally when we advise businesses coming to Australia, some of them might be small businesses where their business owners migrate to Australia as well. So I thought it's a good idea to give you an understanding of how we tax individuals to start off with. So depending on whether or not an individual is a resident or non-resident of Australia, the tax implications would differ. So broadly, an individual would be considered a tax resident of Australia if any of those 4 tests are met. So the first test is, do they reside according to ordinary concepts? So this test basically looks at the intention of the taxpayer. So if you have a person coming to Australia with their family, they're bringing all their money and their assets into Australia, chances are they will reside in Australia according to ordinary concepts. However, if they leave their family behind or most of their assets are abroad, even if they're in Australia, they might not pass this test. So that's the first test, is just checking whether we reside according to the dictionary definition of residing. Then the next step is it's the 183-day test. Now, most of you would be familiar with this test because that's the primary test in some of the countries within Asia. But an individual could be considered a tax resident of Australia if they spend more than 183 days in Australia, unless their usual place of abode is somewhere else. So what is the usual place of abode? So this is basically looking at a situation where you might have a person who comes in for more than 183 days to work in Australia, but they don't have any fixed accommodation. Their family is overseas. So a perfect example of this would be someone like who works in an oil rig. Whilst they do come in Australia for more than 183 days, they haven't done much to establish residency over here because traditionally their family would be overseas. They don't have any apartments. They generally stay in transient accommodation. So you're looking at a broad range of factors in determining where someone's usual place of abode is. And the third and fourth tests are the domicile test. So a domicile is basically, it's acquired at birth. So for instance, my domicile by birth is Indian. So any Australian who's domiciled in Australia would be considered an Australian resident unless they have a permanent place of abode somewhere else. So an Australian going overseas would generally be domiciled in Australia unless they've made a choice to make that location their permanent place of abode. So again, this is mainly looking at Australian residents going outside rather than people coming inside. And the last test is if you're a member of a government superannuation scheme, of a certain government superannuation scheme, you're considered a resident of Australia. So again, this is mainly looking at government employees. It's not really applicable to most migrants coming into Australia. So at the outset, you can see that these rules are fairly complex, and we've done a lot of residency advice for clients coming into Australia where it's not so clear. And a lot of times we actually have to apply to the Australian tax office for a private binding ruling to give their judgment on what they think, whether the person's a resident of Australia or not. And a lot of these things are escalated to the courts, and it's fought in court because it's so complex. It can go either ways. So there are a lot of strange decisions coming out of the courts in relation to residency. The government have acknowledged it. So in the last budget earlier this year, they announced that they will be revamping the residency tests for individuals coming to Australia, or all individuals in Australia. So there's no legislation that's been released as yet, But what they've suggested is the 183-day test will become the primary test within Australia. So if you have a person coming in, spending more than 183 days in Australia, they will be considered tax residents of Australia, irrespective of all the other things that I spoke about, where their family is, where all their assets are. They're just going to do what's done in most of Asia already and just simplify this. So if a person passes that test, they will be a resident of Australia. If they fail it, they could still be a resident of Australia under some secondary test. Again, they haven't released any legislation. Hopefully that should be coming soon within the next year or so. The Australian government has been dealing with COVID, so I think this has been on the background. So hopefully they'll get to it soon because it affects most of our clients. Chai, next slide, please. So depending on whether you're a tax resident or not, Australia taxes you differently, obviously. So generally, Australia taxes its residents on worldwide income. So that includes all income from overseas, capital gains tax from overseas, et cetera, et cetera. However, concessional rules apply to temporary residents of Australia. So temporary residents of Australia are those who are coming to Australia on a temporary visa. And this is most of our business migrants will come to Australia on a temporary visa. They generally apply for, I think, between 2 to 4 years, and then they'll slowly transition into a permanent visa once they meet the tests under the migration rules. So generally, most will come under the temporary visa, under a temporary visa. So I have 3 different sections there. So from a starting point, tax residents of Australia. So these are all those like me and Chai, and anyone who comes into Australia under a permanent visa. They are taxable on worldwide income. Now, Australia does have capital gains tax, which applies to the disposal of capital gains asset, which is, for example, property. And capital gains tax would apply to assets owned worldwide. Okay, so it's not only assets situated in Australia. If you're a tax resident of Australia, we're going to tax you on everything. And that's why Chai suggested the ATO is nasty, because we go after everything once you're a resident over here. Now, when people come on a permanent visa, what happens is they're deemed to have acquired their foreign assets at the date they become tax residents of Australia. So any increase in value from the date of residency till the time they dispose it will get taxed within Australia, and the person will be liable to pay CGT on it. If you hold an asset for more than 1 year, we have a 50% CGT discount. So essentially, you're only paying tax on half of it. So yeah, so that's how it works for tax residents of Australia in a nutshell. So then moving on to temporary residents. So these are the guys who come in on a temporary visa. They, like I mentioned, they tax concessionally for tax purposes. They're only taxed on Australian sourced income and certain types of foreign income, foreign employment income. So they're not taxable on foreign rent, foreign trust distributions, and things like that. And generally, CGT is only levied on the disposal of taxable Australian property. So I've included a small box there, what's considered taxable Australian property. So you can refer to that later. So generally, what we see with our clients coming over here is during the period of temporary residency, there's heaps of planning that can be done within that window, because the clients aren't subject to tax on most of their foreign income. So what we try to do is help them tidy up their foreign assets, dispose of them prior to becoming permanent residents of Australia, and just planning for the transition between temporary residency and permanent residency. The only downside of being a temporary resident is you don't have access to the 50% discount as you would if you were a tax resident of Australia. Again, that's a small downside. And then lastly, you have foreign residents. So if you're a foreign resident of Australia, that is, you're not a tax resident under any of those tests. You're taxable on Australian source income only. CGT is only levied on the disposable of taxable Australian property, which is, for example, Australian land. So we don't tax foreigners generally on the disposal of foreign property. because that's outside the Australian system. Certain types of income are subject to final withholding tax within Australia. And generally, for instance, interest is taxed at 10% by the banks. Unfranked dividends are taxed at 30% withholding tax, and royalties at 30% as well. So that's generally the tax rate. However, if there is a double tax agreement, those rates can be reduced. And just bear in mind, I think Australia has double tax agreements with over 40 countries. So, and a lot of them with Asian countries as well. So those rates may be reduced. Next slide, please. Okay, so that was the taxation of individuals in a nutshell. Now I'll just go through common structures we generally use. So first up, we could use trusts. Again, the structures generally depend on the type of business, what they're trying to acquire, whether there's property or not. But these are the general structures we have in place. So trusts, they're normally discretionary or unit trusts. How they work is any profits that are earned by the trust are distributed to their beneficiaries or their unit holders. And they're taxed at the beneficiary or unit holder level. So at their relevant marginal tax rate. Our marginal tax rates go up to 47% for individuals, so it could be pretty high. Losses incurred by trusts are retained and carried forward to future years and can only be claimed if you pass certain tests. And trusts are eligible for the 50% CGT discount as well. So that's why if you're buying property, a lot of people will put them in a trust because of the CGT discount. Next up, we have partnerships. Similar to trust, the profits are distributed to partners and the partners are taxed at their relevant marginal tax rate. However, unlike trust, losses can actually be distributed from a partnership to their partners. So that's one of the benefits of going down a partnership structure. And lastly, you have companies. Again, this is the most common type of structure you'd use for businesses coming into Australia. For some reason, we have a dual corporate tax rate system. So depending on the type of entity you are, whether and your turnover and the type of income you earn, you could have a 25% tax rate or 30% tax rate. It's nonsensical at this stage to have two different tax rates, but that's what we have right now. Dividends paid to shareholders can be franked. So if a company has paid a tax on their profits, when they pay their profits out to their shareholders via dividend, it attaches a credit to the dividend, and the shareholder can use that credit to reduce their CGT their tax liability when they do their tax return. So it's called a franking system. However, companies aren't eligible for the 50% CGT discount, and losses are generally retained within a company and can only be used in future years, subject to them passing certain loss tests. Next slide, please. Okay, I think this is my last slide. So I'll briefly go through how to establish a company in Australia. So generally, when a foreign entity is doing business in Australia, you have two options. One is to establish a subsidiary, or wholly owned, or however you want to own it, or you register a branch with APEC. So a subsidiary is a separate legal entity. It needs to be registered with ASIC. You have to have one Australian tax resident director. You have to appoint a public officer. So a public officer is basically the person responsible for meeting the tax obligations of an entity. And it's important to be aware that a subsidiary, or even if it's a wholly owned subsidiary, is a separate legal entity to its parent entity. So for asset protection purposes, it works for most foreign businesses coming out here and establishing a sub. However, there are some additional requirements. So subsidiaries need to lodge audited financial statements with ASIC unless there's an exemption that has been received by ASIC. And there are exemptions for certain wholly owned small businesses. Companies, so a subsidiary within Australia is taxed at 30%. However, it's taxed at 25% from the 2022 income year onwards if its aggregated turnover is less than 50 million. And 80% or less of its income comes from passive sources. So that's interest, dividends, and stuff like that. So this is what I was talking about, the dual corporate tax rate system. So it's either 30% or 25%. Australia has just introduced new law, so all directors have to set up a director identification number. So all company directors need to apply for this going forward, and this applies to foreign directors as well. The reason most people go for subsidiaries as opposed to branches is it's easier to set up. You can do it in a day, but branches generally take a bit more time. And once you've established a subsidiary in Australia, they're taxed on worldwide income. On the other half of the slide, I've gone through a branch. So a branch is registered with ASIC as a foreign company. For tax purposes, we generally call them a permanent establishment. So they're not a separate legal entity. They must lodge financial reports. I don't think they have to be audited, but they have to be lodged with ASIC each year. And again, like subsidiaries, it's a similar tax treatment. They're taxed at 25% or 30%. However, obviously, since it's not a sub, they don't have to appoint a local director, but they do have to appoint a local agent in Australia who has to be a tax resident of Australia. And they must appoint a public officer to oversee their Australian tax obligations. And yeah, and generally it takes a bit longer to set up than a sub because of the ridiculous identification requirements. And they're generally only taxable on Australian source income. So that's it from me. That's taxation in Australia in 4 slides.
Thanks. I think there's other taxes as well.
Yeah, and sorry, yeah, so other taxes, we do have taxes at the federal and the state level. So we have GST, fringe benefits tax. So for instance, businesses with if their turnover exceeds $75,000 in an income year, they have to register for GST, which is levied at 10% on their goods and services they supply to their customers. GST is paid to the ATO on a monthly, quarterly, or annual basis through business activity statements. From an employer point of view, employers are required to withhold taxes from any payments they make to their employees. This is called a pay-as-you-go withholding system. And again, like GST, it's paid to the ATO on an annual, quarterly, or monthly basis, depending on how you registered for BASs. In addition to employment taxes, you also have to pay superannuation guarantee on your wages paid to your employees. Superannuation guarantee is our version of pensions. So 10% of an employee's salary goes towards their superannuation fund. Then another employer obligation we have is fringe benefits tax. So this applies to any non-cash benefits you pay to your employees. Traditionally, if you provide an employee with a vehicle, a loan, or housing, it's subject to FBT. It's really important to get advice in relation to FBT because it can be really costly. The FBT tax rate is 47%. So if you get it wrong, it's quite a substantial financial burden. So that's all federal taxes. From an indirect tax point of view, we have payroll tax in Australia. So that's levied levied on taxable wages exceeding a certain threshold, depending on state by state. Land tax is paid annually on the value of unimproved land. This is again done at a state level. Transfer duty, which we have in most countries in Asia, that's generally paid on the transfer of property, which includes real property and businesses as well in certain cases. And again, that's done at the state level. And it's really important to be aware that because our target audience would be foreign owners and foreign businesses, foreign buyers may be subject to surcharges. And these surcharges for land tax and for instance, in transfer duty could be as high as 8%. So, and it's again, depends on a state by state basis. So that's it from me, Chai. I'll pass it back to you.
No worries. So apparently there are a lot more text than just that. So you still have one more, you kind of almost missed one slide. So just quickly about, I suppose that's, all about doing business in Australia. Just sort of want to, if we may, just quickly go through about more Australia so that, our counterparts or, the clients of our counterparts out there know about more Australia. So we have 14 offices in Australia. We have 5,000 plus team member. We command an 80 billion revenues, Australian dollars, obviously. Sorry, it's 80 million. Sorry, that's probably BN. I wish we are actually 80 billion anyway. So, but that's a typo there. My apologies. So we command in excess of 80 million, and we are constantly growing in a way. So we have services. We have 4 core services as typical accounting and consulting firms would have. So we have audit and assurance, and we have we have bring in data analytics audit as well. Recently, we have under that we have risk and governance as well. And then we have obviously traditionally the taxation. So we look after international tax, transfer pricings. I know one of the audience here joined us, that he's Anthony Haley. He's he's the expert in transfer pricings and part of the members of National Asia Desk as well. Business advisory, we obviously have business advisory. We brought on wealth management as well. We have forensics accounting. Like I mentioned, we have governance and risk advisory. And obviously we have business services. Now Asia Desk being identified as one of the separate services, I suppose, in terms of not giving you any sort of technical experts advice, but more on business ethic, translation support, and matching your needs with the with our requirement, with our resources to maximize the benefit to reach a win-win situation for both parties. And obviously under there, our business services, we have cybersecurity services. We have the normal outsourced CFO bookkeeping, we do have just last note on that. We do have litigations as well. So this is the sectors that are how to say that our client as a whole network has something to do with or have involved with. So we have agribusiness, biotech, technologies, education, EMR, food services, healthcare, indigenous organizations, and legal, local governments, manufacturing, not-for-profit. Not-for-profits, obviously, as you all know, those are anything to do with cares, run for a not-for-profit reasons. Professional services, property construction, retail, technology, tourism and hospitality, transport and logistics, and well, even with the pets, I guess. Now, so that's as a geographical representations of where we are. We obviously have 14 offices, and as you can see, we would have Perth, Darwin, or Adelaide, and all that. So which you probably would have already well versed of. We have a board. The structures is that we, as a network, we have a More Australia board. Those are the people that sitting in there. We have representatives from all different offices or states. Then we have as a management teams to support the board, national boards. Obviously, we have a national teams headed by Lana, and obviously Varun is proud to be one of the team members. And if anybody noticed, Dorina Parsons, she's the national head of strategic communications, which actually have a lot of input into this webinar and works into this getting it up and running. So and national committees, we do have a lot more national committee than shown here, but obviously just don't want to bore you with others. We just want to show you the most important one, being the number one right at the top left-hand corner. That's Mr. Chai, leading the Nationals Asia Desk. The rest of it, well, just come to me if you have any questions. in terms of business opportunities, because normally we are the frontier to our Asian counterpart. So we are the go-to place. Normally, we encourage all to sort of reach out to me first. Then we will deliberate your requirements in our monthly committee meeting to make sure that all your requirements are, adequately taken care of. So that's all from us, and it's on the dot 11 o'clock. Well, I suppose the original plan should have some, a few minutes for you guys to in your questions. So I do encourage you to stay on just to ask a few questions. If you may use your chat function there. So I'll see what sort of questions that we have to our moderator, I guess.
Chai, we have a couple of questions come through. So Chris asked that if a subsidiary is set up, it can be done. You mentioned it can be done in a day, but I presume there are hurdles to overcome. Can you please provide examples of some hurdles? So generally, what we notice with foreign-owned subsidiaries being set up is the identification documents for foreign directors. That could be a bit challenging at times, which may take a bit of may take a while, but generally it's not too hard to. It's fairly quick to even set up a wholly owned subsidiary with foreign directors as well. So there are ways to work through it, where if you have an Australian local director, that makes the identification requirements a lot easier. So even though there are some hurdles, it's not very hard to overcome. I think the main problem going forward will be the director identification numbers, which they've just introduced. That'll require a bit more time, and we're still. It only applies from November, so next week. So we're still trying to figure out what the teething issues will be for foreign directors, but we assume there will be some that will happen going forward. And then Chris also asked that, is there a double tax agreement between Hong Kong and Australia? And any timeline if there is? No, there's no double tax agreement between Hong Kong and Australia. So it's a bit, so there's no agreement between them. Chai, I think this is a question for you. What is the present level of actual business between Australia and China? Australian businesses into China, excluding mining and agriculture?
Oh, well, I guess at my level, I suppose, at our firm levels, we see that the activities are still going on. In fact, I'm actually got a referrals that the Melbourne office, Melbourne-based companies, involved in agri-tech, having a WOFE up in China. So they want to do. They're looking for IPO, and they're looking for the accounts to be audited as well. So at our level, I suppose at the firm operating level, we see that things still happening. Obviously, although it has been sort of highlighted in the media that there seems to have a cold war between China and Australia. There's embargo and all that stuff, but from what I understand through normal networking, so things are still happening at a sensible business commercial level. What percentage? That's another question. They say that what percentage of ASX listed company can a foreign company go to before FIRB? I think that's more like I think there's no restriction. Well, depends. I can't say that is no restrictions because the rules is that if anything to do with land, there is a threshold. So in terms of nationals' interests and the details of it will probably have to come to you, and tick it off this because in general there is the restriction, but that depends on what sort of ASIC listed company you're talking about. That means that in in general, it means that it depends on what sort of business that the company are into, whether they are have a mass land holding, involved in property development and all that. So I hope that everybody's have a fair few takeaway from this webinar. Obviously, comments are welcomed, feedbacks are welcomed, and not necessarily the questions have to be asked now if you don't have the time or you haven't actually come to think about what sort of specific questions that you want to ask. I do encourage all to sort of reach out to us, myself, Varun, to get your question answered. Thank you very much for joining us, and we wish you have a good day ahead.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for your time today.